Chapter 1. The Unseen Prison. The icy cold of the planet Cathal clung to Ethan Calloway as he descended from his shuttle. The air felt thin, the sky above dark with swirling clouds, and the ground below was an expanse of cracked stone. Cathal was a planet that served one purpose in the Galactic Empire. It was home to the most notorious prison known to all sentient species. The infamous Cathal prison was where the worst offenders across the galaxy were sent, and once inside, few ever left. It wasn't designed for rehabilitation. No, Cathal was meant to break you. Ethan had been briefed on the importance of his mission during his voyage to this forsaken place. A small human crew had been captured while on an exploratory mission that accidentally violated the territory of the Zaltec, a brutal and uncompromising alien species known for their fierce adherence to rules and a near fanatical sense of honor. The humans had been imprisoned on Cathal, and as one of Earth's most skilled negotiators, it fell to Ethan to secure their release. The massive prison gates loomed before him, towering high, carved with intricate designs that depicted battles and victories of the Zaltec. The doors themselves appeared to be made of some unknown black stone, which shimmered in the dim light of the planet's sun. Ethan's breath turned to mist in the frigid air as he approached, flanked by two Zaltec guards. The guards were imposing creatures, nearly 8 feet tall with reptilian scales that glistened like steel under their armor. Their eyes, an eerie glowing orange, followed every movement Ethan made with a predator's intensity. Ethan could feel their gaze burn through him as they marched toward the entrance of the Warden's domain, deep within the prison complex. Each step felt like a march into the unknown, a descent into a realm from which many never returned. "Keep your head, Calloway," Ethan muttered to himself as he exhaled, seeing his breath cloud in front of him. "You've dealt with worse." But even he knew that wasn't true. Ethan had dealt with many alien species in his career, but the Zaltec were something else entirely. He'd heard whispers of their customs, how their sense of honor was deeply tied to their primal nature. They didn't just operate with logic or diplomacy, they believed in dominance, in proving one's worth through trials that many species would consider barbaric. Ethan had been warned not to show fear, but that was easier said than done. As they approached the main hall, the doors opened with a low rumble. Beyond was an expansive chamber, its ceilings so high they vanished into shadow. The room was dimly lit by glowing orbs that hovered in midair, casting an ethereal glow on the polished black stone walls. It was a stark contrast to the cold, harsh environment outside. The air here was warmer, almost humid, with a faint scent of incense, something musky and alien. At the far end of the room, seated on a grand throne carved from what looked like obsidian, was Zarika, the Warden of Cathal. Zarika was every bit as imposing as the rumors had suggested. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, her muscular frame was adorned in intricately detailed armor, her dark-scaled skin shimmering in the glow of the orbs. Her face was framed by a crest of spikes, her glowing orange eyes locked onto Ethan the moment he entered the chamber. Behind her throne, draped on the walls, were trophies, remnants of past conquests. There were helmets, weapons, and even bones from those who had dared defy her. "Human!" Zarika's voice echoed through the chamber, low and rumbling like distant thunder. She rose from her throne with a fluid grace that belied her size, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "You've come far to stand before me." Ethan took a deep breath, keeping his composure. He had been in tense negotiations before, but never in an environment that screamed danger from every corner. He knew that every word, every gesture, would be scrutinized. "I have, Warden Zarika," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I come on behalf of the United Terran Coalition to negotiate the release of my people explorers who inadvertently entered your territory. We recognize the severity of the situation and are willing to discuss terms for their release." Zarika's eyes narrowed, her sharp teeth briefly visible as her lips curled into a smirk. "Inadvertently? Is that how you humans excuse your trespasses?" She stepped down from her throne, moving closer to Ethan, her heavy boots echoing in the vast chamber. "Your people violated our sacred grounds. In the Zaltec tradition, that is a grave offense." Ethan held his ground as Zarika approached, towering over him. He could feel the heat of her body radiating off her as she loomed above, her eyes assessing him, weighing him. "I understand the gravity of the offense," Ethan continued, "and I'm here to make amends, To find a solution that honors the customs of the Zaltec while ensuring the safety of my crew. Zarika tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. You speak with confidence, human. But words are not enough here on Cathal. We do not settle disputes with mere diplomacy. She circled him slowly, her gaze never leaving him, like a predator sizing up its prey. What do you propose, then? Ethan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Zarika stopped in front of him, her glowing eyes boring into his. You will have to prove your worth, human. The Zaltec respect strength, and your people have been lacking in that regard. She smirked, showing her teeth again. There will be trials. Trials? Ethan repeated cautiously. Zarika's smirk grew wider, her eyes glinting with dark amusement. Oh yes. You wish to see your people freed? Then you must satisfy me, human. Not with words, but with actions. Prove to me that your species is worth respecting. Only then will I consider your request. Ethan's mind raced. He had expected negotiations, perhaps even some show of force, but this was beyond what he had anticipated. Still, there was no turning back now. His crew's lives depended on him. And what, exactly, do these trials entail? Ethan asked, forcing himself to meet her gaze. Zarika chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. You'll find out soon enough, human. But know this, you will not leave Cathal without satisfying me. Fail, and your people will remain my prisoners. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Ethan knew then that he had entered a game where the rules were stacked against him. But he had no choice but to play, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Chapter 2. The First Trial, Strength of the Body. The sound of clanging gates echoed through the stone halls as Ethan Calloway was led into the heart of Cathal's arena. The air here was different, thicker, charged with an unsettling tension. Above him, rows of alien spectators, all from various species imprisoned on Cathal, watched with morbid curiosity. Among them, towering over all, sat Zarika, the warden of this brutal place. Her glowing eyes observed from her grand perch as if already certain of the outcome. Ethan had been briefed on the customs of the Zaltec, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw intimidation of standing in the open, awaiting his trial by combat. The arena was a vast, circular pit made from the same obsidian stone that lined the prison halls, its ground worn smooth by countless battles fought within. There were no advanced weapons here, only rudimentary tools of war scattered around the arena. Swords, shields, and heavy clubs, seemingly relics of a bygone era. From her high throne, Zarika's voice boomed. The first trial will test the human strength. The Zaltec respect nothing more than the strength of the body. Her words were followed by a ripple of cheers from the crowd. You will face one of our finest warriors. If you survive, you earn the right to continue. If you fall, your people remain in my custody. Ethan's grip tightened around the hilt of the short sword he had picked up from the ground. His mind raced. He wasn't a soldier. His skills lay in negotiation, in careful speech and measured decisions, not in raw combat. But as the crowd's jeers intensified, he realized he had no choice but to fight. The only way to save his crew was to survive this brutal trial. A low growl came from the other side of the arena as the gate opposite Ethan slowly creaked open. The sound alone sent a chill down his spine. Emerging from the darkness was a hulking Zaltec warrior, easily twice Ethan's size and covered in battle scars. The warrior carried a massive war hammer, its head embedded with spikes that glinted in the dim light. His eyes glowed orange, like Zarika's, but filled with far more primal rage. The crowd roared as the Zaltec warrior stepped into the arena, his heavy boots thudding against the stone floor. He raised his war hammer high, showing off his impressive strength, and the cheers of the audience grew deafening. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his palms sweaty as he steadied himself. Zarika stood, raising one hand to quiet the audience. Let the trial begin. The moment the words left her mouth, the Zaltec warrior charged forward with terrifying speed, his war hammer raised high above his head. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized just how fast the massive alien was. There was no time to think, only react. With a quick sidestep, Ethan narrowly avoided the first swing of the war hammer, the heavy weapon smashing into the ground where he had just stood. The impact sent a shockwave through the arena floor, cracking the stone and kicking up dust. Ethan rolled to the side, his heart racing. He couldn't afford to take even one hit. The Zaltec warrior bellowed in frustration, pulling the war hammer from the ground and swinging it horizontally with a wide arc. Ethan ducked just in time, feeling the air rush past him as the spiked head of the hammer whooshed overhead. His mind was racing. He couldn't rely on brute strength to win this fight. He had to be smart, use the warrior's size and aggression against him. Seeing an opening, Ethan darted forward, slashing with his sword at the Zaltec's exposed flank. The blade connected, but it barely made a dent against the warrior's thick, scaly skin. The Zaltec laughed, swinging his arm to backhand Ethan across the chest. The blow sent Ethan sprawling backward, the force knocking the wind from his lungs. Pain shot through his ribs as he hit the ground hard, but he scrambled to his feet, refusing to give up. "You call that a fight, human?" the warrior growled, advancing on Ethan again. His voice was deep and filled with mockery. "This will be over soon." Ethan staggered back, barely keeping his balance as he raised his sword again. His muscles ached, but he couldn't let himself be overwhelmed. He studied the warrior's movements, noticing how the massive weapon slowed him down just enough. If Ethan could stay on his feet and tire him out, there might be a chance. The Zaltec swung his hammer again, this time with more fury. Ethan ducked, narrowly dodging the attack. He knew he couldn't keep evading forever, but there was one advantage he had: the warrior's overconfidence. The Zaltec believed he had already won. That arrogance was something Ethan could use. Taking a deep breath, Ethan darted toward one of the arena's pillars. The Zaltec followed, roaring as he brought his hammer down in a powerful strike. But Ethan was ready this time. At the last second, he rolled to the side, and the hammer smashed into the stone pillar instead. The impact caused the pillar to crack, and shards of stone flew in all directions. Using the moment of distraction, Ethan lunged forward, this time aiming for the Zaltec's knee. His sword sliced into the softer joint beneath the armor, and the warrior roared in pain, stumbling back. Ethan pressed the advantage, slashing again, this time at the warrior's hand holding the hammer. The blade cut deep, and the Zaltec dropped his weapon with a furious cry. Now weaponless and limping, the Zaltec's glowing eyes burned with rage, but there was fear there as well, a fear Ethan hadn't seen before. The crowd, once roaring in anticipation of his defeat, was now silent, watching in shock as the human outmaneuvered one of their own. Ethan stood his ground, his sword raised, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, but he couldn't let himself get cocky. The warrior was wounded, but not defeated yet. With a roar of defiance, the Zaltec charged again, but this time his movements were slower, his strength fading. Ethan sidestepped once more, bringing his sword up in a final strike to the back of the warrior's leg. The Zaltec fell to one knee, blood pouring from his wounds, and the crowd gasped in disbelief. Zarika's voice rang out over the arena. "Enough!" The warrior slumped to the ground, defeated but still alive. Ethan lowered his sword, his body trembling from the exertion. He looked up at Zarika, who was standing now, her expression unreadable. "You have survived the first trial, human," she said, her voice carrying a strange mix of amusement and respect. "But do not think your victory makes you invincible. There are more trials to come." Ethan nodded, though his body screamed in protest. He had won this round, but he knew Zarika wasn't done with him yet. The true challenge was only beginning. Chapter 3. The Second Trial, Strength of the Mind. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath before two Zaltec guards escorted him out of the arena. His body ached, his ribs throbbed where he'd been struck, and every muscle screamed in protest. But he couldn't afford to rest. The first trial was over, but Zarika had made it clear there were more to come. The guards led him through a maze of dark corridors, the stone walls cold to the touch, until they reached a small chamber. It was different from the brutal atmosphere of the arena. The room was dimly lit, with strange alien symbols etched into the walls, and at the center was a large, circular platform. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to assess what could come next. Zarika stood near the platform, waiting for him with a curious look in her eyes. "You've survived the trial of the body, human. Impressive. But strength isn't just about muscles and endurance. It's about the mind, too. The Zaltec value intelligence as much as physical prowess." Ethan nodded, his breathing steadying. "I figured as much." What's the next test? Zarika's lips curled into a smile, though there was something predatory about it. You will face a mental challenge, human. A puzzle designed to test not only your intellect but your resilience under pressure. Ethan approached the platform, his eyes scanning it. There were intricate patterns carved into the surface, and in the center were several metallic cubes, each with glowing runes that pulsed with an alien energy. The patterns and cubes formed an elaborate puzzle that seemed far beyond anything he'd ever encountered before. Zarika's voice broke through his concentration. The puzzle has only one solution. But there's a twist, human. You see, the puzzle is timed. Fail to solve it within the allotted time, and the platform will activate a force field that will collapse on you, crushing you. Succeed, and you will move on to the final trial. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was no simple test of wit, it was a death trap disguised as a puzzle. But he couldn't afford to panic. He had come this far, and he couldn't let his mind falter now. He stepped onto the platform, and the moment his foot touched the surface, the runes flared to life. The cubes began to shift and rotate, the glowing symbols moving in intricate patterns. Ethan felt a low hum vibrate beneath his feet as the countdown began. Zarika watched with keen interest, her arms crossed. Begin, human. Ethan focused on the puzzle. He could feel the pressure of the countdown, the tension in the room mounting with every second. The cubes weren't just random shapes, they seemed to represent key elements of the Zaltec culture. The glowing symbols looked familiar, resembling the ancient languages he had studied during his briefings on the alien species. His mind worked quickly, deciphering the runes and their connections to the patterns etched into the platform. The puzzle required not just intelligence but an understanding of how the Zaltec saw the world and understanding of their logic and beliefs. It was a test of empathy as much as intellect. As he moved the cubes, sliding them into place and aligning the symbols, the hum beneath the platform grew louder. He could feel the pressure building, the countdown speeding up as if the puzzle itself was testing his nerve. Come on, think, Ethan muttered under his breath. His fingers moved faster now, adjusting the cubes, matching the symbols and patterns that mirrored Zaltec history. He recalled the briefings, the wars they fought, their strict adherence to codes of honor and conquest. He was nearly there, the symbols beginning to align in perfect sequence. But as he placed the final cube into position, the hum beneath his feet became deafening. Something was wrong. He had missed a one small detail. His mind raced as the force field began to form, glowing blue energy crackling around the edges of the platform. No, 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 Ethan muttered, his fingers flying across the cubes, searching for the mistake. He was running out of time, the force field inching closer. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to think, to stay calm under the weight of impending doom. Then it hit him, a simple oversight. The Zaltec didn't prioritize symmetry as most species did. Their sense of balance came from asymmetry, from chaos. He quickly adjusted the final cube, aligning it just slightly off-center. The platform pulsed with a sudden burst of energy, and the force field vanished. The hum died down, replaced by silence. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, his hands shaking as he realized he had solved it just in time. Zarika clapped slowly, her eyes gleaming with admiration. Impressive, human. You kept your wits about you even when the odds were against you. Ethan stepped off the platform, his body still trembling from the intensity of the experience. I've had practice under pressure, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Zarika stepped closer, towering over him once more. You've passed the second trial, but there is one final test, and it will not be so easily solved. Ethan looked up at her, the exhaustion in his body giving way to a steely determination. What's the final trial? Zarika smiled darkly. The final test, human, is not of your body or mind. It is a test of your spirit, and it will be the hardest of all. Chapter 4. The Final Trial, Strength of the Spirit. The dim corridors of Cathal's prison gave way to an unexpected silence as Ethan was escorted to a private chamber unlike any he had seen before. It was not the brutal, cold stone of the previous trials, but a place filled with a strange, eerie tranquility. The walls shimmered with an otherworldly light, casting long shadows that danced across the room. A subtle, vibrating energy pulsed through the floor, as if the chamber itself was alive and waiting for something. Zarika stood near the center of the room, her arms crossed, watching Ethan with an intensity he had come to expect. The previous trials had tested his body and mind, but this was different. There was an ominous tension in the air, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The final trial, Zarika said, her voice low and solemn, is not one of the flesh or intellect. This is a test of your spirit, human. Many have faced it, and few have passed. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had barely survived the physical combat, and the mental puzzle had nearly broken him. Now, they were asking him to face something far more elusive. What do you mean by a test of spirit? Zarika stepped forward, her towering figure casting a long shadow over him. You will face yourself, she said cryptically. Your deepest fears, your greatest regrets. Everything you've buried will be brought to the surface. Only by confronting them can you prove your worth. Ethan frowned, trying to understand. You mean, I'll be reliving memories? Zarika shook her head. No, human. Not reliving. You will face your very soul. The darkness within you. The pain you carry. This trial will show you what kind of man you truly are. Before Ethan could respond, the guards pushed him gently toward the center of the chamber. A large, circular platform pulsed with faint energy under his feet. Zarika stood at the edge, her glowing eyes fixed on him, as if searching for any sign of hesitation or fear. Sit, Zarika commanded. Ethan obeyed, lowering himself onto the platform. The moment he sat, the energy in the room intensified, and the walls seemed to close in. His heart began to race, a creeping sense of dread filling his chest. Close your eyes, Zarika said softly. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before shutting his eyes. Instantly, the hum of the room deepened, and he felt the world around him shift. The ground disappeared beneath him, and he was falling into an endless void. There was no sound, no light, only the sensation of being pulled into darkness. When Ethan opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in a place that was achingly familiar, yet filled him with a profound sense of fear. It was Earth, or at least a version of it. He was in the middle of a sprawling city, but it wasn't the city that terrified him, it was the silence. The streets were empty, the buildings crumbled and abandoned. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling clouds, and the air carried the scent of ash. Ethan recognized this scene. It was the future he had always feared, the collapse of everything he had worked for. The failure of humanity. He had seen glimpses of this in his nightmares, but now it was real, and he was standing in the middle of it. As he walked through the desolate streets, Ethan began to hear voices, faint whispers that grew louder with each step. They were accusing, filled with anger and sorrow. You failed us. You left us behind. You couldn't save us. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the voices. They were the voices of the people he had tried to help, the crew he had come to save, the ones he had failed to rescue in past missions. Their faces appeared in the shadows, ghostly images of men and women who had looked to him for guidance. He could see their accusing eyes, their expressions twisted in pain. His worst fear, his deepest regret was laid bare before him. The fear that he wasn't good enough, that no matter how hard he tried, he would always fail the people who depended on him. Ethan clenched his fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but there was nowhere to go. The empty streets stretched endlessly in every direction, and the voices grew louder, pressing in on him from all sides. You can't save them. You never could. Is this the leader you thought you were? He dropped to his knees, his mind racing, trying to find a way out. But there was no escaping the truth. The pain of his failures consumed him, and the weight of it pressed down on his chest, threatening to crush him. But then, something changed. A voice, clear and strong, broke through the chaos. It's not about perfection, Ethan. It's about persistence. Ethan froze. The voice wasn't accusing, it was his own. A part of him that he had buried long ago. The part that refused to give in to despair. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his hands trembling but steady. The ghosts of his past still surrounded him, their eyes filled with sorrow, but they no longer accused him. Instead, they simply watched. Ethan took a deep breath. I couldn't save all of you, he said quietly, his voice shaking. I made mistakes. I failed, but I didn't stop trying. The whispers quieted, and the oppressive weight that had been crushing him began to lift. The city around him faded, and the swirling clouds above parted, revealing a faint, distant light. Ethan closed his eyes again, letting the light wash over him. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't invincible. But he had the strength to keep going, to push forward even in the face of his failures. That was his true strength, the strength of his spirit. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the chamber. The energy in the room had returned to its calm, steady hum, and Zerika stood before him, her expression unreadable. "You faced your spirit, human," she said softly, her tone no longer laced with mockery. "You confronted your deepest fears and did not break. Few have passed this trial." Ethan stood slowly, his body still trembling from the experience. He met Zerika's gaze, the weight of what he had just experienced settling in. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, his voice hoarse, "but I survived." Zerika nodded, a hint of respect in her glowing eyes. "You have proven yourself, human. Your strength is not just of body or mind but of spirit. You have earned the freedom of your people." Ethan exhaled deeply, relief flooding his veins. He had passed the final trial, and his crew would be free. But more than that, he had faced the darkest parts of himself and come out stronger. Zerika extended a hand to him, her voice softer than before. "You have earned my respect, Ethan Calloway. Leave Cathal with your head held high. Not many can say they have survived the trials of the Zaltec." Ethan took her hand, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. The trials were over, but the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. As he left Cathal behind, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had the strength to face them.